Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Roseville Wrecking Ball. The Roseville Wrecking Ball.
Joshua Shrum. He is a very talented steward, very knowledgeable.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball. This is one of those podcasts where I listen to every episode. I love what he's putting out there.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball. Josh Shrum.
Parcels of Knowledge. Does a fantastic job with that podcast.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball. He is an Article 8 scholar, and thank God. We need Article 8 scholars right now.
Tune into the Parcels of Knowledge podcast while you're on the route. That's the mailman's playbook, brother.
Good morning and welcome back to Parcels of Knowledge, that podcast dedicated to delivering knowledge to the city letter carrier with your host, the Roseville Wrecking Ball. All right, so we finished off the year with 601. We did make it over that hump. Now, don't forget that next month we're going to have a Q&A once again. This time it will be for trustee candidate David Groskoff. We're going to have him on in the end of January, beginning of February. You'll have until January 30th to submit questions to him via my email, rosevillewreckingball@yahoo.com. That is rosevillewreckingball@yahoo.com. You'll have until the 30th to submit any question. He's going to answer anything that you ask him. And I think that one will be a good episode. But today, I'd like to talk about fishing for information. I recently had somebody talk to me about how that they got some issues with this. This is often an issue between branches and individual stewards, or stewards and carriers that want them to file a grievance, or, I just think that a lot of these issues is just plain laziness, or an understanding that they just can't get a lot done at once. And what I'm talking about is as it relates to fishing for information. A lot of people have this weird idea that unions are not entitled to certain information unless a carrier says that they want to file a grievance. This is incorrect. I don't know why certain branches still operate this way. I don't know why they ever operated this way. But surely it has to be from laziness, because if you know about a violation, you don't have to have a grievant tell you that there's a grievance. And it doesn't take much to just open your eyes. Like, you just have to look around sometimes and you'll see thousands of grievances everywhere. And to file on those without a grievant asking is absolutely expected of you as a steward. As far as I'm concerned, I don't understand why you wouldn't, because that's part of your job. You're supposed to stop future violations from happening. It's just like what I use for discipline sometimes. If management tolerates a behavior, it becomes an acceptable behavior, and therefore becomes more difficult to discipline a carrier for, because the carrier wouldn't know otherwise. They wouldn't know it wasn't an unacceptable behavior. So, same with this. If you're just allowing management to violate the contract as much as they want, and you're just turning the other way because you don't have a grievant yet, well, that's allowing and tolerating unacceptable behavior, creating an atmosphere that it's acceptable. Now, a lot of our contract mirrors what the NLRA gives us in general. So that's where I'm going to look at first, because the NLRA has unequivocally upheld our ability to ask for information. A union may submit requests for information at any point in the contract administration process. For example, the union can seek information needed to monitor whether the employer is following the contract, investigate a complaint by an employee, decide whether to file a grievance or move it to a higher step, prepare for an arbitration hearing. Those are 4 examples. One of the 4 talks about a grievance. The other 3 is specifically on the union to decide. And my favorite is monitor whether the employer is following the contract. A lot of people will define that as phishing. There's certain information that is just integral to your job, such as hours information, everything reports. Article 8, for example. I'll use that as an example. Even if you want to go as far as to say, hey, you have to have an understanding that there's an issue, every single office in the U.S. has an issue with Article 8. This pretty much makes it so that information should be freely available. All you have to have is a understanding that there could be an issue. That's what I'm getting at. A lot of people will take phishing as, oh, well, you don't know that there's an issue yet. But as long as you have an understanding that there could be an issue, you have the right to that information. And as long as you're a steward, you can request it under Article 31, and you should get all information as long as you give them an understanding of why you need it sometimes. Now, let me read out of Article 31. The employer will make available for inspection by the union all relevant information necessary for collective bargaining or the enforcement, administration, or interpretation of this agreement, including information necessary to determine whether to file or to continue the processing of a grievance under this agreement. Upon the request of the union, the employer will furnish such information, provided, however, that the employer may require the union to reimburse the USPS for any costs reasonably incurred in obtaining the information. Nothing herein shall waive any rights the union may have to obtain information under the National Labor Relations Act as amended. So, again, reinforcing our rights under the National Labor Relations Act, who specifically allows for the request of information to monitor whether the employer is adhering to the contract. That is golden. That's essentially backing phishing. Now, although we do have other things that talk about having a commitment to having a reason to find this information. For example, document 459 refers to management will not unreasonably delay requests to review documents, files, and other records necessary for processing a grievance. When the need is not apparent, some rationale should be provided. Now, typically, the NLRA talks about certain documents such as work hours. The need is inherent in the fact that it's your documentation. The need for not apparent would be that, in this case, they were requesting medical records. That's not work-related records that are automatically assumed to be relevant. That's all that's talking about. The union should provide valid reasons for any information requested and be able to show relevance to the grievance or possible grievance being investigated. I don't see anything wrong with saying that. For example, for those guys that might want the everything report and management saying, no, that's fucking phishing, dude. You know, you don't know that there's where's your grievance? Well, you can just say, look, I understand that there's some Article 8 issues that I think are going on, so I'm investigating whether or not there's an Article 8 issue. That's as simple as fucking that. You don't have to tell them who. You don't have to tell them what. You don't have to tell them why. That's for the informal A meeting. But in the meantime, you may have to give some basic relevancy. And that's what people get confused with phishing. People would call that phishing. Like, oh, well, you can't tell me what exactly you need it for. Well, you don't really have to. As long as it's relevant to potentially processing or enforcing the contract, then you don't need more specific details. I'm going on to also, I'm going to quote M1492 because a lot of people will say, oh, well, M1492 is the reason why we shouldn't fish or we should work together. I think it's the other way around. I think M1492 actually does support my arguments. So one of the points of M1492, which is the joint statement of expectations, is we will do our best to understand and respect each other's roles, responsibilities, and interests and challenges. Another point is we are committed to eliminating abuses of our grievance arbitration procedure, such as the filing of unwarranted grievances to clog the system or a refusal to resolve grievances even where there are no legitimate differences of opinion between the parties. When you read those together, some people will say, oh, well, that's what we're talking about. If you're fishing, you're filing unwarranted grievances. And that is absolutely not true. That's not an abuse of the grievance procedure. In fact, it's the other way around. We need to understand that the union and respect the union's role in terms of requesting for information and enforcing the contract. We're also committed to eliminating abuses or grievance procedure. Well, abuses would be allowing us to tolerate the behavior while we know that there's a violation occurring. Again, tolerating a behavior makes it become an acceptable behavior depending on what it is. If something's followed as many times as it's broken, it loses its weight in arbitration. So, once again, it would be abusing the grievance arbitration system if we decided not to address a problem in its entirety. And we have every right to look up how far and to what extent this violation could be occurring. For example, if I found out that management falsified clock rings and stole from a carrier, all of a sudden I know there's an issue. I have every right to ask for everybody's clock rings all the way back to however many years I want, as long as I think that it could potentially be linked to this issue. So, for example, when I found out that management was falsifying clock rings here, I asked for the past 2 years everything report for everybody. And one thing I'll give you advice on is if you ask for that, ask for it in PDF form. Article 31 says that the ASM is the controlling document for certain things, like, for example, where they get the price for how much, like every certain amount of pages is this much cents. That comes from the ASM. So it's already talked about as a controlling document. The ASM also says that you need to give it in the requester's format, as long as it's feasible. Well, ours reports are able to be put into PDF format, which is what I would prefer everybody use because they are searchable. So, for example, if you're looking for falsified clock rings and what they're doing is they're putting in 1017As, well, all you had to do is get the thousands of pages of clock rings and type in 1017A. Or type in disallowed time, because it comes up either way depending on how they did the comments. But either way, we're getting off track. I do want to just let you guys know the union has the right to request information, even information to ensure that the contract is being enforced. And if you're not receiving that information, then I would suggest you file a labor charge. If your branch is telling you not to request that information and you're requesting it anyway because it's your right as a steward, management's not providing it to you because your branch is telling them that they don't have to, again, file labor charge, because the only name that's important on that steward time request is the steward of record. So you requested the information. It doesn't matter what other officials say. If you request the information, you get the information. If you don't get the information, it's a labor charge. So make sure that you guys are getting certain information on a regular basis, like Article 8 information. If you need daily performance reports, I get those every day in the morning. Every day. If you need everything reports, I get those once a week. I'll ask for the pay period that's relevant. So if today's Monday, then I'll ask for the prior week in PDF format sent to my email. And if they don't want to send it to your email, give them a flash drive. Either way, it gives you a rundown of anything you might need to reference for Article 8. I don't even have to give them a reason anymore because in general, Article 8 is a repetitive issue. So you have the right, let's say you filed for Article 8 a year ago. I would continue requesting information a month later. And then, of course, they're continuing to violate. You have the right to understand the extent of this violation. So if they're continuing to violate, go ahead and file again. Continue requesting information. That's how you get to the point where you're just going to have the information on a regular basis. But yet, I don't know. I just think it's ridiculous. I hope I'm not being indelicate when I say that I think a lot of this issue stems from laziness. Some branches don't feel like filing grievances. Some stewards don't feel like filing grievances, so maybe they would prefer to look the other way. It is not in your best interest, I can guarantee you that. And we have the right to fish to a certain degree. In fact, I think it's more so we have the right in most situations. I think it's very seldom where we're bargaining in bad faith. For example, if I was sitting here with no grievances to file, and I just want to be a weirdo getting time off my route, then I would request every single report under the sun. But if you're requesting it for a reason, for example, you just got a 204B and you didn't get the 1723, so you're requesting to see if there was one even. I mean, you don't have to know that there's a violation. Of course, in that situation, there already is a violation because they didn't give it to you. But there could be two. They might not have even produced one. So either way, you have the right, as long as it makes logical sense. Just use common sense with this one. If it provides some sort of relevance, it's yours. It's your information to request. Stop being so unwilling to file grievances. That's exactly what we need to do so that we don't have to file grievances in the future. That's the point of the contract. And that's the point of your enforcement. We don't want to have to sit here and file grievance after grievance. So nip it in the bud where it is right now. But hopefully I wasn't too ranty today. And hopefully you learned something valuable today. As always, have a good day out there and stay safe.
If these guys are getting educated, we will be in big trouble.
Management's been weighing you down like a bag of wet catalogs, but you don't gotta take it. You strap on the elbow of education, dig it?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Roseville Wrecking Ball. The Roseville Wrecking Ball.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball is an Article 8 scholar, and thank God, we need Article 8 scholars right now. The grievance genius and the Roseville Wrecking Ball doing amazing work.
Tune into the Parcels of Knowledge podcast while you're on the route. That's the mailman's playbook, brother.